Okay, so let's make a start. So good morning, everybody, and thank you ever so much for joining us this morning for our webinar, where we'll talk to you about Microsoft Sentinel. And rather than dig into the technical aspects and so on and so forth, what we're going to do is sort of take a little bit of a higher level view, really, around some things that you might want to consider in terms of, costing, resourcing, and so forth for operating and adopting Sentinel within your respective organizations. So my name is Matthew Richards. I look after our professional services practice at Third Space. I'm also joined by my colleague Anna Webb, who manages our security operations function. And Anna will talk to you a little later in the presentation. Before we make a start or dig into the content, I just wanted to make sure that you're aware that this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be made available shortly after the event. You'll also notice a GoToWebinar sort of control panel applet, for want of a better word, where you can ask questions, raise any problems. Please do that. If you're having problems with audio or with video, we've got people behind the scenes that will hopefully be able to help you. But indeed, as we progress through the webinar, if you do have questions, submit them, because we are trying to engineer some time at the end to answer them. If for some reason that we don't have the time, we will absolutely get back to you anyway. So what are we going to cover this morning? Well, I'm just going to give a very brief and high-level overview of Sentinel, just for those who may not be familiar with it. I'm not going to dig into any technical aspects, but again, if you do have any technical questions, please post those in the questions area, and we can cover those. Once I've done that, I'll then talk about some deployment considerations and give you some insights or some things to consider and to think about if you're looking at Sentinel. We'll then look at the operational aspects of Sentinel. So what does it mean for you to manage that internally, different options available to you, and Anna will cover that. And then we'll look at some next steps, so things that we commonly move forward with a number of our clients, and I'll elaborate a little bit more on that as we get to it. And then fingers crossed, if we've got time, then we'll cover any questions that are being posted. But just to repeat, if for some reason we don't have time, then I will definitely get back to you with answers. Let's take a look at Microsoft Sentinel. So it was Azure Sentinel, just to raise a point here. Microsoft, in their appetite to rename a lot of their technologies reasonably often, which is a little bit challenging to keep on top of. Sentinel is now called Microsoft Sentinel, just a minor thing just to call out there. So what is it? Well, in essence, Microsoft Sentinel is Microsoft's offering in the SIEM market. So a SIEM being a security incident and event management tool. And in line with every SIEM, it starts on the left-hand side on my slide here in terms of feeding that product some security telemetry. Obviously, a SIEM can't do anything without its ability to collect from lots of different sources. So we'll talk a little bit more in a second about the typical sort of sources that Sentinel can consume and the connectors that are available. But we need to feed the SIEM or Microsoft Sentinel with information. And once we've done that, then the product sort of stores that information in its repository, and then goes to work on analyzing that information with a view of surfacing important security insights, trends, and so on and so forth, malicious, suspicious activities. So this is all based on a raft of things called analytic rules, machine learning models, and so on and so forth. And it's really evolving at such a rapid pace. The amount of focus that Microsoft have on Microsoft Sentinel at the moment is great. It's really impressive, and they're bringing a whole load of innovation to that platform on a regular basis, including the ability to process the security telemetry and being able to sort of join the dots, if you like, between different signals to surface that important information. And of course, with it being in the repository that Sentinel uses, then we're able to sort of query that information, or more accurately, hunt through that information. So having, you know, human analysts going through and performing, you know, proactive hunting activities across the information that you store. You know, whilst machine learning models and analytic rules are fantastic, you know, absolutely no substitute for that sort of human curiosity and knowledge, and trying to bring those or join the dots between certain things. So, you know, a lot of capability in a platform to perform those activities. And when Sentinel raises insights, it raises those in terms of an incident. So an incident is created in Sentinel to reflect something that Sentinel has observed. And that could be made up of many alerts. So it could be a lot of alerts that it's picking up from lots of different systems, different sort of metrics in different areas, tying all those together into a single incident that allows you then to investigate that incident, either to confirm it being a benign and a false positive, or whatever it might be, or indeed, actually, this looks really risky and we need to dig further. So there's, you know, there's a comprehensive investigative capability within that platform in terms of the tools that you have to query that information, to go hunting, to support you know, the investigation into that particular incident. And then what we have on the far right here is the sort of what we call the SOAR capability. So Sentinel is often referred to as a SIEM and a SOAR, SOAR, security orchestration, automation and response. And this is the ability for Sentinel to basically react to certain incidents. So that reaction, that response, could be a number of different things. It could be some sort of orchestration activity to raise it with external systems, different incident management tools, security incident management tools, whatever you have within your organization. It could be raising notifications in Microsoft Teams or other communication platforms, emails, etc. It could be to perform a number of automated investigative activities. So an incident is raised, actually that triggers an automation workflow, which will then gather additional information to support the human analysts then in their efforts in terms of investigating and analyzing that incident. So, you know, the ability to sort of save quite a lot of time there for your analyst. And then ultimately we can react and affect change, change to maybe mitigate risk, change to eradicate and remove a risk. Obviously we need to have a high level of confidence with that particular incident in order to maybe affect change that has an end user impact, but there are plenty of scenarios that are applicable there. So the automation capability of Sentinel is significant and very capable. So talking about the, you know, a SIEM isn't a SIEM unless you can feed it information. It all starts with that sort of connecting to external sources in order to consume security telemetry, log ingestion, another word for that. And as you would expect, Sentinel has a comprehensive collection of connectors, some of which are free to ingest, so there's no cost in terms of its ingestion. And we'll touch on how Sentinel is what is the cost model for Sentinel shortly. But some of those connectors offer an opportunity to ingest data free of charge, things like Office 365, Azure activity logs. And when I say Office 365, I'm talking about SharePoint, Teams, Exchange, and so forth. And you can consume those without incurring any cost. But the actual capability of Sentinel, certainly on the Microsoft platform, so any services on the Azure or M365 platform, then predominantly it's an incredibly easy activity, just tick in the box, yes, I want to connect that, please, and then everything flows from there. Excuse me. So really easy for those native service to service type sort of integrations, but equally we can reach out externally from you know, the Microsoft ecosystem, if you like, and easily consume from on-premises or from any other cloud, and all of the supported, you know, there's a really wide range of supported third-party vendor product support in Sentinel. I'm not going to go through that entire list. It's sort of in the hundreds at the moment and keeps growing, but all the usual suspects that you would expect. And there's a lot of IP that's developed along with each one of these connectors to make sense of that information that you're connecting, from your firewall, from your switch, or whatever it might be. And of course, Sentinel can then consume using standard log format. So, syslog or Ceph over syslog. We can deploy agents and start consuming, custom log sources. And the repository that Sentinel uses is one that is, tried and tested and been around for a long, long time. That platform is Log Analytics. So, as the slide says, a proven platform to store the information that allows you to query at a really performant way. And, huge amounts of data that's being consumed on a daily basis into those types of repositories. So then looking just a little bit more broadly with Sentinel, so we've covered the left-hand side here, which is the ingestion side. That then gets stored in a log analytics workspace, the repository, the database, whatever you want to call it. And then that's where Sentinel applies all its analytics capabilities. So based on machine learning, static analytic rules, some user and entity behavior analysis capability as well, looking at trends for different entities within the repository. So an entity could be an identity, could be a host, an endpoint, whatever it might be, and trying to understand, the complex nature in which that entity interacts with other entities within the organization. So lots of interesting areas that Sentinel provides to you to be able to understand the security scenario or situation within your organization. And we have things like Jupyter notebooks as well. So notebooks are a way of describing, I guess, in essence, a series of investigative activities that can be graphically represented and repeatable as well, so that we can run these on a periodic basis. Could be useful for, certain analysts to run on a regular basis. A whole load of example IP for each and every aspect of Sentinel available in Microsoft, in Sentinel GitHub, which is highly supported by the global community as well. Playbooks there represent the automation and orchestration capability. Pretty comprehensive, both within Sentinel and beyond. So leveraging things like, logic apps, and we can either, go down to Azure Functions and all sorts of different things that we're able to interact with. And then on the far right-hand side, the ability to integrate with external systems is significant. So the ability to, integrate with products like ServiceNow, if you've got an external ticketing system or whatever it might be, the ability to reach out and integrate with those systems, is comprehensive. And I've mentioned there about the community support. So a huge global community supporting, IP development. You'll see in the GitHub repository, thousands of Sentinel artifacts that you can lift and maybe customize, tweak, or whatever it may be, but benefit from that sort of community sharing of IP. Looking at deployment side of things, so I wanted to bring this slide up just to make it sort of clear and give you some idea of cost with Sentinel. So the first thing to say is there's no license for Sentinel. You don't have to subscribe to a license as such to allow you to use it. It's something that you can enable within your Azure tenant, and it will be based on the amount of information that you feed it. It's an ingestion or consumption-based cost model. So I've got some of the costs there. The Sentinel cost is broken down into a number of different areas, predominantly the log analytics ingestion, so the amount of data we're ingesting, the Sentinel analytics that need to happen on top of that. There's a retention cost, and there are some sort of outlier costs depending on how you intend to use Sentinel. Obviously, with the automation and orchestration capabilities, there is a potential to incur some costs depending on what it is you're interacting with, or services that you're trying to manipulate or connect to. But in essence, predominantly, the core of the cost is around the amount of ingestion and indeed the amount of retention of that data as well. So Sentinel offers 3 months free, but you can store beyond that within the Sentinel repository. That can be potentially costly. Sentinel repository will allow you to store up to 2 years of data. Most organizations need to retain data for much longer periods than that and want to do it in a cost-effective way. Lots of options to do that in terms of low cost sort of cold storage, if you like, and you know, there's activity ongoing at the moment within the Sentinel product group to make that even easier to be able to achieve. So I mentioned the free log sources. So we've got Azure Activity, Azure AD, Identity Protection, etc., etc. Those sources you can consume free of charge. And also here I've got Microsoft Security Solutions. So if you're using things like Defender for Office, Defender for Endpoint, Identity, for cloud apps, etc., etc., then the alerts and insights that those products raise can be consumed free of charge into Sentinel. So Sentinel can understand an alert that Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps has raised, and it will correlate that information with additional information it has in the repository in order to maybe improve or increase the certainty or priority with certain incidents. An indication of cost. Now, this is a really difficult area to be accurate with, because we're dependent, because Sentinel is based on the amount of information it ingests. Then it all depends on how active, noisy, and busy the things that you're ingesting from are. What I've got here is some indications of a number of clients that we engage with and manage, and the typical sort of cost there. But this is by no means, you know, it's purely take this as estimate and just a guide. When we're talking about large organizations, you know, we're talking about sort of 5,000 thereabouts sort of seats. It's difficult to measure it by seat because it really depends on what we're consuming. But if you think of it in that way, but of course a large organization can be tens of thousands up to hundreds of thousands, and therefore, you know, what I'm presenting here, around 800 gigabytes a month, that could be what those organizations consume in a day. And so the model sort of expands to accommodate whatever scenario. Now, just the last thing I'll say here is that if you are potentially going to ingest large amounts of data, then I'd urge you to look at what we call the commitment tiers within Sentinel. So for those organizations that are looking to consume, I think in excess of around 70 or 80 gigabytes a day, then going onto a commitment tier makes sense, because if you're not in a commitment tier, then you're going to be paying the pay-as-you-go rate, which is what we've got on the screen there. The commitment tiers offer 50, 55, 60, and so on percentage reduction of that pay-as-you-go rate, but you commit to that usage on a monthly basis. Now, Sentinel, the commitment tiers are typically 100 gig, 2, 3, 4, 5. Recently, Microsoft has acknowledged that actually some clients are in the terabyte range. So they're offering commitment tiers for those clients who need to consume, you know, terabytes and above, and they offer significant discounts. So shifting sort of focus a little bit from the cost and now looking at, you know, how do you start with Sentinel? Well, I think the key message here is don't sort of run before you can walk. What we see often with clients is that, oh, can we connect all of these sources up and get everything hooked up and this and that and the other? And that really isn't a good approach to start with. You don't want to be taking this all-you-can-eat approach, because what you're going to do is incur cost, potentially unnecessarily, and also flood your system or flood Sentinel with potentially a large amount of false positive incidents and generate a lot of noise. So take a phased approach, and we look at it in sort of a maturity model from a foundation, advanced and optimized perspective. And if we take that sort of a little further, Sentinel actually is not something that, you know, as with a lot of products really, it's not something that you just configure, invest a bit of time, get that right, and then step away and let Sentinel do its thing. It's a continual effort in order to maintain, improve, adjust the focus. The threat landscape changes. We've got current threats, we've got emerging threats. How do we accommodate those? So it's a continual sort of process. Well, what I'm trying to get through here is that we need to sort of walk before we can run, certainly for those who are maybe looking at a SIEM solution for the first time. Then, you know, starting at that foundation phase and taking a risk-based approach. This is something we feel really strongly about. It's about looking at your organization. It's about assessing the risk, identifying those high-value assets, those ingress egress points within your organization. You know, where are these places that I need to be or have eyes on, really, and that will drive then the prioritized sort of list of connectors that you need to consider, and start with a small number of those connectors. Get those in, start ingesting the data, making some tuning or perform some tuning exercises, and so on and so forth, and then build upon that in the next phase, add the next set of connectors. And as you move through sort of foundation into advanced, you can then start thinking about, well, you know, how can I start applying some orchestration and automation? Now I've got this platform that is sort of my foundation. How can I start adding some advanced capabilities? And then, you know, building upon that through into the optimized side of things. And it is actually a continual exercise. So please, you know, take it step by step. Obviously, you can consume everything if you wanted, but in our experience and observations, both delivering this as a service and actually working with clients, it's the phased walk before you can run approach which will deliver you the best value. Okay, so that was more of the sort of, I guess, high-level technical side and logistics around how do we feed Sentinel and how should we approach that. Obviously, if you're considering Sentinel, you need people to manage that platform, and you need to have the processes and procedures in place to do that properly. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Anna now, who will talk to you a little more on that subject. So over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Matthew. So yes, first of all, I'm going to talk to you about the capability consideration. So when setting up a security capability, there are a number of elements that need to be considered. And the easiest way to approach this is to break it down into the areas of people, process, and technology. So they are the elements really that are going to tie your security operations capability together. So on the people side, we need to think about recruitment and all the things that go with that. So things like security vetting, career framework, retention of staff, because that's, you know, obviously that's really important. Skills and experience, need to look at training and development, and also segregation of duties. You know, you don't want to have a team of 10 analysts and they're all working on the same thing. You need to understand, you know, who's doing what and why they're doing it and when they're doing it. From the process perspective, there's obviously documentation. A lot of clients have a need for governance and compliance, and there needs to be processes relating to security that sit around those as well. And of course, you have your risk management and things like access control, who can access what and when. And on the technology side, as Matthew's already said, you know, it's a continual improvement. So things like support and management of that technology, looking at the tuning and optimization so you're getting the most out of the system. And then obviously, you know, your log sources, how are you going to query those? What sort of retention are you going to have? And what about data destruction at the end of it when you're done with the data? So there's a number of ways that this security capability can be delivered, and the first of which businesses tend to look at, and looking at the poll, is 29% are looking at that in-house delivery. So in-house, as the name suggests, is when you deliver the capability completely internally, including setup and installation of your SIEM or SOAR platform. And if you're looking at managing Sentinel or another SIEM and building your security operations totally in-house, then as well as the costs that Mathew has mentioned around log ingestion and retention, there are also other associated costs that need to be considered around those three areas of people, process, technology. Usually with in-house delivery, you'll be setting up from scratch. And what we've seen typically is that businesses will poach staff from their internal IT department to carry out the security function, or possibly IT staff will need to wear more than one hat, which doesn't really provide a dedicated resource to security, but sometimes it works. Normally with Microsoft Sentinel, you would be looking at staff with an infrastructure background, or those that have an understanding or some experience with other Microsoft products that, you know, but maybe they haven't made the leap into security just yet. Recruitment can be difficult, as security is a buoyant market currently and potential analysts are holding out for the highest bidder. COVID's driven up the price and doubled the challenge of recruiting staff, as people are now able to work remotely and don't have to leave the comfort of their home, but can command a higher salary regardless of where they are in the country. And with training around Sentinel, again, there is a comprehensive training program with Microsoft. So around the Microsoft Azure products and Microsoft security products, and the online self-paced training is free, but obviously you've got to give staff time to do that, with the exception of the exam cost, obviously. But instructor-led training, which may be more suitable for an in-house delivered solution, obviously comes at a cost. And then beyond, you know, the product-specific training, you've got the more general security training, which is much more costly. So SANS, for instance, something like a GCIA would cost around £5,000 just for the one course. Processes, a number of security specific processes would need to be set up. You may already have incident management or problem management, but there needs to be a security element added to those. And process writing takes man hours, which obviously has an equivalent cost associated with it. And processes are living documents which need to be maintained. And that can be time consuming. Some processes may already exist, like I said, but they need to be modified, and often it is easier to create new. And then on the technology side, a traditional SIEM typically needs a lot of development to take it beyond the out-of-the-box product and make it more effective as a solution. Sentinel has loads of out-of-the-box options, both around data connectors, workbooks, which are the dashboards, and obviously the playbooks, which is the automation. But as Mathew said, it's a continuous improvement program of development and improvement. The fire and forget method with deployment just won't work, as you'll quickly run into a lot of noise from the ingestion of data and will not be able to see clearly what security issues are in your environment, you know, and which ones are the actual false positives. Setup and log ingestion can be straightforward, but once data starts flowing into Sentinel and incidents are being generated, it can be a little overwhelming. We see it typically when we set up clients and, you know, you're bringing that data in for the first time, and, you know, there is a lot coming into that tenant. Add in things like firewalls, Fortinets in particular, which seem to be very popular at the moment, and the noise levels raise significantly. So new operations in-house can find themselves quickly overwhelmed by the data, and it takes time to become familiar with tuning and all the automation that goes with it. Spiraling costs can really make the in-house delivery option prohibitive from the outset. We've run a number of roundtables, and businesses have told us they've done feasibility studies and they've got as far as looking at the people element, and they've had to stop there because it just, you know, it doesn't work for them. But then on the other end of the scale, you have the fully managed delivery approach, which there's been only 4% have looked at this. So there's some real positives to this kind of delivery. You know, someone else is taking care of your security. It allows you to focus then on your core objectives as you grow in your business or grow in your IT department. overall responsibility lies with the third party, although this can also be a disadvantage as well. Typically, there are lower costs associated with fully managed delivery than in-house, and it's easier because you know that you're paying X amount per year and that's it. So third party will have established processes as well, so they're already there and they've got that in-house expertise that you can leverage. They know exactly what they're doing, and that's great. They have a broader view of things like threat intelligence, greater breadth of threat intelligence feeds coming into the team, and they're able to more easily leverage partnerships with technology providers such as Microsoft. It's less of a headache with recruitment because the third party worries about recruitment, you don't have to, and they will provide things like standard reporting, which will help you with any sort of accreditation that you might be looking at, or audit requirements that you might need. So the negatives, though, are what you would expect, really, if you're handing over everything to a fully managed service by a third party. There is that potential loss of control and visibility of what is happening in your environment. You're fully reliant on the third party and you're very much a small fish in a big pond. And if they're a supplier that has a large number of clients that they're supporting, I know some have sort of over 4,000 or more, you lose that personal touch and potentially have the issue where different analysts are working on your incidents without really understanding your environment, which can compromise consistency of delivery. And it can be costly as well with regards to things like data transfer and storage. So a lot of third parties require that the data is transferred to them, so they ship the logs. So they're typically shipped to the third party storage area for log storage and log management. So then you've also got the problem that that data is being moved out of your environment, and that poses complications with regards to data residency, retention and destruction. Again, it's something that feeds into compliance, governance, and those areas when you're being audited. So the final option, and the one that seems to be most popular on the poll as well, is the hybrid or blended delivery. So we've got 43% of people looking at this particular delivery approach. What we can say is that blended delivery is a much more collaborative approach. It's that there are a large number of elements that make up the cost of your in-house delivery that in a blended delivery would be covered by the third party, but you would still be keeping a small number of people in-house. So you'd have maybe your IT manager or a security based manager and a smaller team of analysts that would work together with that third party. So the third party basically becomes an extension of your IT or your security department. And by leveraging that sort of fit with the MSP, maybe they can provide guided remediation, which is what we do at Third Space. It allows that segregation of duties as well. So the third parties providing incident response, incident management, and the guided remediation, and then the in-house can then actually go and do that remediation. So basically, you're not marking your own homework, you're keeping things separate, which is really positive. Processes again are typically in place with a managed security provider, but they can feed into those base processes within your environment. So the MSP will have that incident management, problem management, change management set up. They will be fully understanding of that, but they will integrate with whatever you have in-house as well. Things like threat intelligence and security bulletins are all managed by the managed service provider. So again, you're leveraging that expertise, but still having things visible to you as well. With the technology, overall responsibility for implementation, maintenance, and improvement can lie with the managed provider. They have the expertise in the platform, particularly with Sentinel, which they can apply across their client base. So you'll be getting the benefit of any sort of improvements that they've maybe made for other clients in a similar industry. and they can carry out the tuning and optimization, but you can still see into your environment. You can still see what's happening in your SIEM, and you can still have a hand in that. You know, it's a lot more working together, collaborative approach. So yeah, so the definite pros are that, you know, you get the expertise, you get the cost savings, you leverage those partnerships and the threat intelligence. It is an extension of your security or IT department, and it allows for those really good segregation of roles. The negatives, I guess, you know, there is some sort of, the accountability is split. So some accountability sits with you, some sits with the third party, and that maybe can prove a little difficult at times. The log transfer, that can still remain. Some companies still insist, even with Sentinel, that, you know, you transfer your logs to them. It's not something we do at Third Space. You don't always get dedicated or allocated analysts. That is something that some clients offer, some managed service people offer to clients, but not always. And the other thing is that remediation can sit with the client, so that, you know, the remediation of what's happening in your environment sits with you. So the onus is still on you to ultimately fix the problem. But if you've got guided remediation, which is what we offer at Third Space, then you have that support to be able to do it. Also, sometimes with these managed service providers, it can be a fire and forget service. So once the incident is escalated, they're on to the next one. But as you can see, the costs around the blended service are very much lower than in-house, and they are obviously much lower than the fully managed delivery as well. Small client typically is 250 staff or less. Medium is around up to the sort of 3,000, 5,000 mark for staff, and then large is above 5,000. So those costs, you know, are really reasonable, really manageable. Typically, if you need that capability and you don't want to outsource everything, or you don't want to do it in-house. I'm going to hand you back to Mathew now, and thanks very much.
Brilliant, thank you, Anna. So we've pretty much come to the end of the session, and we're doing really well on time. Actually, we've got a minute or two left. You might be thinking, actually, yeah, how do I, you know, take the next step for those who may have not had any exposure to Microsoft Sentinel? I've got a couple of things that we commonly move forward with a number of our clients. The first one here is something that we call a Threat Protection and Microsoft Sentinel Accelerator. This is a funded exercise by Microsoft, and this will give you some exposure to the Microsoft threat protection technologies and how Microsoft Sentinel integrates and complements those technologies. And this is a sort of hands-on exercise that we work with you on, and we implement the technology within your environment to allow you to see what insights, you know, how can Sentinel benefit me within my specific environment and infrastructure. For those who want a little more of a comprehensive sort of focus on Microsoft Sentinel, then we offer the proof of concept. Again, this could be Microsoft funded. Again, we can explore all those options if this is of interest. But the difference between, or the key difference with the proof of concept, is that we can, in this exercise, introduce exposure to our managed service in the ways that Anna has already explained. So typically in that blended or hybrid approach. So what we can do is establish sort of a service provider connection into your organization, into Sentinel ultimately, and work collaboratively with you on the insights and intelligence that Sentinel's providing. So for those who are interested in that managed service option or options, then the Sentinel proof of concept is a good exercise. And if you're not, if you want to be fully in-house managed, the proof of concept is still very valid. We'll just focus very much on you know, your specific needs. So if there's interest in any of those, please get in contact. If you've got an existing client manager relationship with us, then obviously reach out to your contact. But alternatively, if not, then you've got a number and an email address there to be able to reach out. So please do that. We'd be happy to have, obviously a no commitment call, something that we call a vision call, to explore and help get you on the right track. So we have gone over a little bit, but I noticed a few questions come in. I'm just going to take the first one in the list. Let me have a look to see what this one is. So there's a question here. How long does a typical deployment take? Yeah, it's a great question, but and I guess the answer is, unfortunately, it depends. But I think if we look broadly and on average, then what we see is sort of a 3 to 6 month period before we can think of Sentinel as embedded and aligned into that sort of foundational element. Obviously, there's continual activity beyond that and to advanced and obviously optimized. But really with Sentinel, because of its cloud native nature, we can enable the product, enable the free connectors, and almost immediately get some value out of that product. So the value you'll be getting and insight will be, pretty much immediate and really peaking at around sort of 6 weeks time. Or period of 6 weeks, but then embedded and fully operationalized, expect 3 to 6 months. But of course, if you're a very large organization, then it's sort of orders of magnitude more than that. So I'm not going to tackle any of the questions, but for those who have submitted, we definitely will get back to you. So rest assured there. Finally, just wanted to say a huge thank you, really, for you taking time out of your day today. Hopefully this session was useful to you. As I mentioned at the top of the session, it is recorded. It will be made available at some point after we finish today. But finally, just another thank you for taking your time out of the day. We hope to speak to you soon.